The battlefield was quiet. Now the sky above burned red with the afterglow of war. The ships had withdrawn, the fire had stopped, the screaming had faded, the land below was soaked with ash smoke and broken machines of both alien and human origin. In the center of the ruined field stood a massive silver structure, shaped like a fang piercing the sky. It was the flagship of the Valari Dominion, and at its heart stood Kale, the commander of the 9th Invasion Fleet. She looked down from the chamber window at the smoking earth with eyes that showed no fear, no joy, only a deep, cold curiosity. Kale had won another battle. Another human outpost had fallen under her command. The humans had resisted more fiercely than predicted. Their soldiers fought like beasts with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Her forces had suffered more than usual, and among the wreckage her warriors had found one human still alive. Not just any human, he was their commander, the one who had held the line when others fled, the one who fought even after the walls collapsed. They brought him to her, wrapped in chains, blood on his face and fire in his eyes. Stood in the center of her chamber, not kneeling, not begging. His name was Reed, and though wounded, he stood tall, his breathing heavy but steady. Kale stepped closer, studying him not like a prisoner, but like a puzzle. Her voice came soft but sharp like ice cutting glass. You fought beyond reason. You should have fallen long before, yet you stood where Reed said nothing at first. His eyes locked on hers. He looked at her not like an enemy, but like a challenge. Then he said something that made the chamber colder. Because we don't stop. Kale narrowed her eyes. Her kind had ruled systems, crushed rebellions, broken empires, and yet this one human with a broken arm and a bruised face stood without fear. She had studied humans through reports, simulations, and interrogation logs, but none of that showed her this raw fire, this defiance not born from strength, but from something deeper. She stepped back and gave an order to her guards. Bring the blade, prepare the right. The guards hesitated only for a moment, then obeyed. From a locked chamber, they brought out a sacred instrument used only in Valari tradition, a thin dagger made from bone and metal carved with ancient symbols. It was used for the rite of memory, a ritual almost forbidden, one that allowed the strong to consume the blood of another and see their mind, feel their spirit. It was a way of taking knowledge through blood. Kale had only used it twice before, and never on a human. She looked at Reed. One last time, you will show me what makes your kind fight like monsters and die like legends. Reed did not resist. He just stared and said in a low tone, you don't want to see what's inside me. Kale did not answer. She cut across his hand with the blade, carefully gathered a few drops of blood, and drank it. Slowly the taste was metallic, sharp. Then suddenly something inside her shifted. The chamber fell away. The world went silent, then exploded with sound, fire, screams, battles, tears, laughter, millions of moments, not hers, not alien but human. She stood in memories that were not her own. She saw earth green and blue and scarred with war. She saw children running in ruined streets, people dancing in firestorms, soldiers charging into hopeless odds, screaming not in rage but in unity. She felt loss, unbearable loss, and yet saw humans rising again and again. She felt the cold of space, the heat of deserts, the hunger, the fear, the determination. She saw hands building cities only to watch them fall and rebuild them stronger. She felt hearts breaking and still beating harder. She saw fire not just from weapons, but from within, and every step through these memories felt like walking through a storm she could not survive. There was a moment, a single memory that hit harder than all the rest. A young boy crying over his fallen family, standing alone in smoke, then picking up a broken weapon and walking forward into the dark, his heart full of fire. Kale fell to her knees inside the vision, unable to breathe, unable to speak. Then the voice came, not Reed's but something deeper. We break but we do not bow. The vision shattered. Her eyes opened, her body shaking, her skin pale, her breath quick. The blood on her tongue still there, but now it tasted like thunder. Her guards stepped forward, confused by her reaction, but she raised a hand stopping them. Her mind spinning not with weakness but with revelation. She looked at Reed again. He stood unchanged, but now she saw something else, not flesh and bone, But something ancient, something terrible and beautiful, the spirit of humanity. Kale rose slowly, her hands clenched, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you?" Reed answered simply. "Human." Kale said nothing more. The guards took him away, but her gaze remained locked on the place where he had stood, her mind still burning with the fire she had tasted. It was not just strength, it was something beyond logic, beyond war, a storm inside a species that refused to kneel no matter the odds. As the doors closed behind her, Kale touched her lips, remembering the taste, the memory, the echo that still rang in her bones, and in a voice only she could hear, she whispered, "You are my end." Kale sat alone in her private chamber, walls of polished obsidian rising around her, lit by dim violet glow, the silence pressing down like a mountain, her thoughts swirling like smoke, refusing to settle. Her eyes stared at her own hands as if they were not hers anymore, as if they belonged to someone else, someone touched by something ancient and unknowable. She had consumed blood before she had seen memories of kings and traitors, of warriors and cowards, of leaders who screamed in fear when death came close, but never had she seen what she had just seen in Reed's blood. Never had she felt something that did not break under pressure, but became stronger in it. She stood and walked slowly toward the wide glass wall that overlooked the battlefield, now cold and quiet. Bodies scattered across the land, machines still smoldering, and above the sky was black, streaked with red from fires below, stars hidden behind the smoke of war. Her eyes locked on the ruins, her heart heavy with something unfamiliar, something she was trained to suppress. She had tasted emotions before: rage, jealousy, fear, but this was different. This was not just feeling, this was understanding, and it shook her too. The core, her mind went back to the vision, to the burning city, where people danced not in joy, but in defiance, to the young boy who walked through ash with empty eyes and a will that burned brighter than the sun, to the old man standing alone in front of tanks with a rock in his hand, to the soldier who dragged his wounded friend through gunfire and kept going even after his own legs gave out, to the mother who lifted rubble with bare hands to save her crying child. Kale had seen 1,000 worlds, and none of them carried such spirits. None of them endured the way humans did. They did not just survive, they refused to die, even when death stood above them. She walked back to the center of the room, her steps slow, her breath deeper than before. The guards outside her door had not heard a sound from within, and dared not ask what happened when she had sent them away after the rite. They had looked confused, but she knew they would not speak a word. None of them could understand what she had felt, what she had seen, what she now feared. She remembered Reed's eyes, those steady, calm eyes that did not flinch when she approached, that did not change even when she tasted his blood. He had known what would happen, he had warned her. And still she drank it, and now she could not escape the echoes. She entered the holding cells below the flagship without a word. The guards moved aside without question. Her presence alone was command. She walked through the cold metal halls until she reached the end, where only one cell was lit, where one man sat chained but upright, his back straight, his gaze unmoved. He looked up as she approached, and something like a faint smile touched his lips back. "So soon," he said, his voice dry but not broken. Kale stepped closer. The guard behind her tried to follow, but she raised her hand and he stopped, then turned and left without a word. The heavy door shut behind her, sealing her inside with the one being who now lived in her mind. More than any memory, she looked at him for a long moment, her voice lower than before. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Reed looked up, and for a moment there was silence between them, like the silence before a storm. Then he answered simply, "Because you already drank the worst part of me." Kale did not reply. Her eyes studied his face, every scar, every line of dirt, every mark of war. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and yet held something unbreakable in his soul. She had seen leaders fall when their ships were destroyed, when their plans failed, when hope died. But Reed sat there without any of that. Without weapons, without soldiers, and yet more dangerous than any commander she had faced. "What is that inside you?" she asked. "What is that storm you carry?" He tilted his head slightly, then said softly, "It's not Just me, it's all of us. It's what happens when you lose your home and make war your shelter. It's what happens when your gods stop listening and you become your own. Answer. Kale took a step back. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they rang with truth. She had seen it in the visions. She had felt the emptiness filled by fury, the cold replaced by resolve, the pain turned into power. She sat down on the bench opposite him, her eyes never leaving his. Do you hate us? She asked. Reed looked up at the ceiling, then back at her, his voice steady. No, I hate war, but sometimes hate is the only thing that keeps people standing. Kale wanted to look away, but she could not. This was not a prisoner. This was a mirror held up to her entire species. Everything her people believed in, power, domination, control, had no weight in the face of what lived inside this man. She had seen the fall of empires in his memories, not caused by numbers or weapons, but by a single word repeated over and over. Never, never give up, never bow, never break. Reed leaned forward slightly, his chains clinking softly. You came here to conquer. You thought we would kneel, but you didn't understand what we are. We don't kneel, we bite. Kale rose slowly, her body tense but her face unreadable. She walked toward the cell door, but paused, her hand on the panel. You saw death in me when I entered, didn't you? Reed's voice was calm. No, I saw doubt, and that's worse for you. She left the cell without another word. The door hissing shut behind her, but her mind remained inside that room, her chest heavy, her breath tight. The fire she had tasted was not fading, it was spreading, changing her, making her question everything she stood for. And as she walked back toward her chambers, the words she refused to say kept echoing in her mind, not in fear, not in shame, but in understanding. My end. The nights aboard the Velari flagship had always felt like time frozen in steel. Silence filled every hallway, every corner, untouched by sleep or dreams, just the cold hum of machines and distant echoes of orders being followed without thought. But this night was different. Kale stood alone in the observation chamber, where stars once brought her pride and now offered no comfort. The stars had watched empires fall and rise. They had seen her victories, but now they felt like eyes watching her, not in awe but in judgment. Thoughts would not stop, her heart beat steady, but her mind pulled her into places she no longer controlled. She remembered how Reed had looked at her, not with fear, not even with hate, but with something that cut deeper. Understanding. He had seen something in her, something she did not want to admit, something that even now grew inside her like a crack in glass, spreading slow but sure. Kale had been born for war, trained in cold halls, where compassion was weakness and victory the only goal. Her hands had spilled blood, her voice had ended rebellions, her eyes had stared down leaders before their worlds turned to dust. But all of that strength, all of that legacy now stood fragile under the weight of what she had felt when Reed's blood touched her soul. She had tasted centuries of pain, and still they stood. She had seen horrors that would break the strongest minds, and still they marched forward. She tried to meditate, tried to silence the noise, but Reed's memories returned uninvited, unshaken. A woman running into flames to save strangers, a child throwing rocks at soldiers, a captain staying behind to cover the retreat, knowing death was near, but choosing it anyway. There was no glory in these visions, no songs, no rewards. Just raw, endless endurance, and every memory struck like thunder against her beliefs. A chime broke her thoughts. One of her commanders entered, bowing low, eyes on the floor. The council awaits your presence. Kale nodded without speaking, followed him through silent corridors, past soldiers who saluted without question. They saw only the armor, not the storm behind it. She entered the high command room, where holograms of Velari leaders blinked into view. They spoke of progress, strategies, reinforcements. None noticed the way Kale stood still, eyes distant, until one of them asked a question that brought her mind snapping back. We assumed the human prisoner is broken by now, ready to be dissected for research. Kale raised her head slowly, her voice sharp but calm. He remains alive and untouched. There was a pause, then a cold voice replied, why? He is a tool, a dying one, nothing more. Kale stepped forward, her gaze piercing through the projection. "He is more than you understand, and if you saw what I saw, you would not speak so lightly." They questioned her sanity, asked if the rite had affected her, if the human had infected her mind. Kale gave no defense. She did not explain what had happened. The council dismissed her with warnings, veiled threats. She did not care. Their words were dust compared to the fire burning inside her. She returned to her chamber once more, and for the first time in her life, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from truth, that she had built her victories on lies, that humans were weak, primitive animals, pretending to be warriors. But Reed had shown her something different, not with words, not with weapons, but through the very blood in his veins. She could not rest, could not escape the feeling that her empire was not facing a simple enemy, but a storm of force that did not care about numbers or weapons, or rank, a force that only grew stronger the more it was pushed. And in Reed she saw the shape of that storm, in his silence, in his gaze, in his pain, worn like armor, unable to fight the pull. Kale returned once more to the prison chamber, where Reed sat as before, eyes half closed, yet alert, as if rest and readiness lived side by side in him. She dismissed the guards again and stepped into the cell alone, the door sealed and the silence wrapped around them. Reed looked up slowly, then said without surprise, "You came back again." Kale stood still for a long moment before asking the question that had haunted her. "Why do you not break?" Reed let out a slow breath, his voice soft but filled with iron. "Because breaking means giving up, and we are not allowed to give up, not when we carry the weight of others, not when our pain is the price of their peace." Kale sat across from him, her posture more human than ever, not straight and cold, but heavy and thoughtful. "I saw what you carry," she said. "I cannot carry it, not like you do." Reed looked at her with the kind of gaze that did not judge but understood. "You are not meant to carry it. You are meant to see it and decide what to do now." She wanted to argue, wanted to reject his words, but the truth inside them left no room for denial. She had seen what he was, and knew her people could not win. Truly, they might destroy cities, they might win battles, but they would never win the spirit that made humans rise again and again from ashes and ruins. There was silence again, but it was different. Now not heavy, not tense, but almost peaceful, as if both knew what came next. Without speaking, Kale stood slowly, looked down at Reed with eyes that no longer saw an enemy, but a warning. "You are dangerous, not because of power, but because of will." Reed nodded once, "And will is the one thing you cannot destroy." She left the cell, and this time did not look back. The halls felt colder, but clearer. Every step forward now felt like walking toward something. She could no longer avoid the truth that the war her people waged was not just failing, it was turning against them, not with force, but with something deeper, something eternal. And deep inside her, she knew she had already changed, that the Kale who walked into that chamber would never return. She was not broken, but she was no longer whole, and in that space between strength and surrender, she began to understand what it truly meant to face the unbreakable. The silence no longer comforted her. The hum of the ship, the cold steel under her feet, the quiet discipline of the crew, none of it brought peace to Kale anymore. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, her armor perfect, her face unreadable, yet something had cracked beneath it. Something no one else could see, but something she could no longer ignore. Every soldier who saluted her, every officer who gave a report, felt distant, like echoes of a life that no longer fit her. She was a commander still, but her heart no longer beat for conquest. She stood on the command bridge, watching the stars drift in silence. Ahead of them lay the next human colony, not yet touched by war, not yet burned by fire. Her generals were preparing the assault, calculating positions, forming attack plans. She said nothing while they spoke, her eyes fixed on the display of the planet, turning slowly below green lands, blue waters, unaware of the storm preparing to strike. The voice of her second in command broke through the air. "We begin orbital strikes in one rotation." Kale nodded slowly, but her mind was already elsewhere. Not on the enemy, not on the mission, but on the man still chained in the lower decks, the man who had opened her eyes with a drop of blood and a storm of memories. The man who had not begged, who had not cursed her, who had only spoken with the strength of truth. Kale returned once more to the holding cells, this time her steps quicker, her heart heavier. Reed was sitting again in the same position, still calm, still whole. The door opened, and she entered alone as before, but this time she sat down without a word, without hesitation, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other, two beings from different worlds with something deep and quiet passing between them. Spoke first, his voice low but steady. "You saw the target, didn't you?" Kale nodded slowly, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "They are not ready. They have families, children, no military strength." Reed looked away, then back at her with eyes like ancient fire, then stopped at Kale's eyes narrowed. "You think I can stop a fleet alone?" Reed answered without fear. "I think you can choose to stop being part of it. And sometimes that's more powerful than any weapon." She wanted to laugh, wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat because somewhere inside she knew he was right. Her orders could kill millions, her silence could destroy lives, but her refusal, her single choice to say no, might begin something else, something greater than orders or ranks. "You don't understand," she said. "If I defy them, they will erase me." Reed leaned forward. "And what will be left of you if you don't?" Question hit harder than she expected. It rang through her chest, through her bones, through the cracks already forming in her soul. She had seen empires collapse under greed, under pride, under fear. But now she saw something more dangerous than all of them. Combined regret, the regret of knowing the truth and doing nothing. Kale stood, her hands clenched, her eyes burning with something she had not felt in years. Choice, not power, not command, but true raw choice. She turned to leave, but Reed's voice stopped her one last time. "If you run, they win. If you kneel, they win. If you fight and fall, we still rise, because that's what we do." Said nothing, but her silence was not weakness. It was weight, the kind of weight only truth could bring. She returned to the bridge, walked past her officers, their eyes on screens, their mouths speaking plans, but none of it reached her. The countdown to attack had already begun. Her second in command approached and paused at her side, awaiting confirmation to launch. Kale stood tall, her voice clear and strong. "Cancel the assault. All ships stand down." The silence that followed was not empty. It was stunned, thick with confusion. The officers looked at each other, then at her, as if waiting for a correction. None came. She repeated her order, then turned to face them fully. "This colony is not a threat. They are not soldiers. They are not armed. We will not become monsters chasing ghosts." Her second in command stepped forward, his voice cold. "This is treason." Kale's voice did not shake then. Right it in fire. He moved to arrest her, but she raised her hand, and the guards nearby hesitated. Her authority still held weight, still carried fear enough to pause them. Kale locked eyes with him, and in that moment, everyone saw what she had become. Not weak, not lost, but something different, something stronger. Because she had seen the truth, and had chosen to bear it. Alone, Reed was freed that same hour. Kale herself released him. No guards, no weapons, just quiet understanding between two who had seen war and chosen a path. Few dared to walk. Red did not ask questions. He only nodded as she handed him a small device, a signal beacon set to human command channels. "Get off this ship. Take this to your people. Tell them what happened. Tell them we are not all blind," Kale said, without pride, without fear. Reed took it, and for a moment, they stood face to face, not as enemies, not as prisoners and captors, but as something more, as two who had looked into the heart of war and seen what lay beyond. Will you survive?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Perhaps not. But maybe that is the cost of truth." Turned and walked away, without chains, without guards, without blood on his hands. This time, and Kale watched him go, feeling both heavier and lighter than ever before. She returned to her chamber, where stars still burned outside, but now they looked different. Not distant, not cold, but alive, full of choices, full of fire. And for the first time in a long time, she closed her eyes, not to escape, but to breathe, because she knew now that even in silence there is power, even in defiance there is peace. And sometimes it takes the taste of fire to remember who you are. The Stars outside the flagship burned quietly like distant embers whispering. Across the dark veil of space, the ship no longer moved with purpose, no orders given, no commands issued. It drifted in silence. Like its commander, still and unspoken, Kale stood at the edge of the bridge, hands folded behind her back, eyes on the endless night. The same stars she once chased in conquest now looked back at her without judgment, only reflection behind her. The crew waited, unsure what path remained before them, half of them loyal to the throne, half to her silence. Tension spread like mist, but no one dared speak first. She had chosen a different path. Now the weight of it rested across her shoulders, heavier than any armor. Her decision to let the human colony live had already begun to ripple across the fleet, whispers turning into questions, questions into doubt, and doubt into fear. She knew how her kind responded to fear, with steel, with fire, with orders to erase those who stepped away from the fold. They would come for her, they would send their judgment cloaked as justice and call it honor, but none of that mattered now. Reed had left the ship quietly through a stolen vessel, guided by the signal Kale had given him. No one had stopped him, not because they agreed, but because they could not explain what held their hands back. Perhaps they too had begun to feel the fire beneath the calm. Perhaps they too had seen a shadow of truth in the cracks she had allowed to form. Kale walked the halls, now empty save for distant echoes, every step without hesitation. Though inside her the storm had not ended, her thoughts pulled toward the man who had undone her, not with blades, not with strength, but with the quiet weight of truth. A man who had bled in silence and shown her more than any report or speech ever had. He had changed nothing with force, yet changed everything around him with presence. She reached the central chamber, where her personal vessel waited, small, fast, meant for travel without escort. She entered alone, leaving behind the fleet and its silence, without a farewell, without final words. She had one last path to walk, not to escape, but to complete what had begun in fire and blood. The stars blurred past her vessel, now moving fast across void and distance, until the human signal grew stronger, until the colony rose into view, untouched and alive. The place her fleet was meant to erase now shone like a truth she had dared to protect below. On its surface green land stretched like open arms, and in its sky no fire burned. She landed without permission, without codes, no soldiers, no guards, only her shadow stepping from metal to soil. The people of the colony watched in stillness, some in fear, some in curiosity. They had expected war, and instead received a single figure wrapped in silence, a commander who once led fire, and now walked without flame. Reed was the first to meet her, eyes steady, as always, standing among the people, like one of them, his presence now both shield and bridge. He stepped forward as she approached, and for a long moment they said nothing, just stood in the soft wind of a world that had survived. She spoke first, her voice not loud, but filled with something real, something human. I came not to ask for mercy, not to make peace, but to tell you the truth. Reed nodded, waiting without interruption. Your blood showed me what no conquest could. The strength of your kind is not in your weapons, not in your ships, but in your refusal to end, your refusal to vanish. Your fire cannot be measured, only felt, and I have felt it. People behind him watched, some unsure, some still afraid, but none turned away. I chose to save this place, not because I am better, not because I am brave, but because I saw what we truly face, and it is not war. It is the mirror of our own weakness. Kale continued, her eyes never leaving his. Reed stepped closer, then said, what will your people do when they find out? They will hunt me, she replied, and perhaps they will erase me, but they cannot erase what I have seen. They cannot unmake what I have become. And what are you now? He asked. She looked past him at the people, the children, the soil, the sky, then back at him, and said, I am no longer theirs. I am no longer what they created. I am what they feared you would make me. Studied her, then slowly knelt before her, not in submission, not in worship, but in honor, the kind only soldiers understand, the kind that rises not from rank but from respect. And she felt something shift, something soft but powerful, something final. Kale dropped to one knee in front of him, To her voice low but clear, for all to hear, you are my end, human. Not by blade, not by war, but by truth you broke what they built in me, and now I stand in what remains. The people stepped forward slowly, not with weapons, not with anger, but with eyes. Open hearts, guarded yet willing, and in that moment, the distance between alien and human became smaller, not gone, but changed, shaped by something deeper than treaties or terms. She remained on the colony, not as ruler, not as prisoner, but as witness, her armor placed aside. Her title forgotten, she walked the fields with those she once sought to destroy, spoke with those she once saw as lesser, and in every word, every silence, she began again. Stars still burned above her, but now they were no longer paths to conquest. Now they were reminders of who she was, and who she chose to become, not because of fear, not because of defeat, but because she had tasted the truth, and chosen to carry it. And so the war did not end, but something greater began, not peace, not yet, but the birth of understanding, the kind that starts with one voice, one choice, and spreads through silence, through blood, through fire, until it becomes a storm that cannot be stopped. The end.